All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all, and welcome to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide, as together we will cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight, right here on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and in Ontario on your hometown classic 1220 AM. And they stream us around the world on classic1220.ca. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com is my email address, and on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. X-Zone Nation, my first guest tonight is Mr. Jon Taylor. We're going to be talking to Jon about parapsychology, physics, and neuroscience. And joining me now from the beautiful country of Spain is Jon Taylor. And Jon, welcome to the X-Zone.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yes.
It's going to be a pleasure to talk to you.
It's a great pleasure having you with us, sir. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to spending over 25 years investigating precognition and other forms of extrasensory perception.
Well, yes, that's quite a long story. My early career was I was born in England, and I was lucky to get a place in the University of Cambridge, where I got an MA in natural sciences. And for a few years, I did research in scientific instruments. I became a little frustrated, and I wanted to move into something more creative. And that led to me joining an advertising agency in London. And after that, I was involved in the marketing business and ended up in Spain as marketing director for a wine company. But my scientific background was beginning to nudge, and I decided to move back into something more scientific. And I had an opportunity to join an oil company. I worked with them on contracts in Italy, Spain, and the UK. And then later I was invited to Abu Dhabi to take up a position with the National Oil Company as materials and purchasing manager. And anyway, when that contract ended, I went back to Spain, and I'd always had an interest in psychic phenomena. And at some point, a friend of mine had some premonitions. And at first I was skeptical. To me, the idea of making contact with the future seemed little more than romantic fantasy. But anyway, it caught my curiosity, and I joined the Society for Psychical Research in London, and I went to their library and read books on the subject and read the technical papers. And eventually I became convinced that ESP, precognition, really exists. And to me, the challenge at that point was to find out how it works. But I didn't realize that I was starting on what was going to be a 25-year project. I had to undertake more studies in physics and neuroscience, but whilst I was working on this, I was encouraged by the fact that the results of experiments being carried out at various laboratories were giving support to the work I was doing. Anyway, in the end, I put together a theory and I presented it to the Parapsychological Association annual conference in Rome in 2013. And then I did another conference on intuition 5 years later in 2019. And that's how it came to be.
Now, you yourself, John, have you had many paranormal experiences?
Yes, I've had what you might call hunches that things are going to happen. Perhaps now, as I'm working in this field, I tend to be on the lookout. And when I find myself thinking about something which is a little odd, I say to myself, well, is that going to link with something in the future? But my interest was started when this friend had a few premonitions, and the advantage was that since I was with her, I was able to understand and ask her questions and find out exactly what seemed to be going on. They were somewhat trivial, but they referred to simple events which occurred about 4 or 5 hours after the premonition. And this is what started my interest.
Now, John, you say that parapsychology and mainstream science at present seem incompatible. Can you explain that?
Well, yes. If you look at Wikipedia, you'll find that the references to parapsychology, to precognition, regard these fields as pseudoscience, and they accuse the parapsychologists of being pseudoscientists. Now, the problem is, as I see it, that parapsychologists are promoting precognition as being a challenge to materialist science. They assume that consciousness carries the information across space and time. And this, of course, doesn't convince the mainstream scientists who tend to take a materialist view. And so it produces skepticism to the phenomena in the first place. And also, in Wikipedia, you'll see that the skeptics are saying that precognition is impossible because it supposes backwards causation, and it also supposes information from a future that doesn't exist. So this has led to a kind of a situation, a crossroads, where the two fields, mainstream science and parapsychology, seem to be drifting apart.
So let me ask you this: after all the studying you've done and the research, and your base education, how do we try to even explain how we can tell the future when the future hasn't even happened yet?
Well, first, before summarizing a theory which explains this, it's first. Well, I found that I had to find out more about what is really happening when someone has a precognition. And I discovered, this is a result of reading lots of experimental results and so on, that precognition is the fundamental phenomenon of ESP. ESP, of course, is supposed to include three phenomena: precognition, knowing something in the future, telepathy, communication with another person, and clairvoyance, which is supposed to be contact with some external event which is outside the reach of the senses. So what I found is that precognition really is fundamental. It's a precognition relating to a later cognition of event. It's a sort of memory of the future, and it occurs when we connect with our future knowledge of the event. In other words, it's a transfer of information from the brain in the future to the brain in the present. It's similar to telepathy, in which the information comes from another brain. And I suggest that there's no real evidence for clairvoyance. It's impossible to explain according to currently understood principles in physics and neuroscience. The problem of collecting and coding the information, and the fact that the brain, a person doesn't have a sensory organ to detect this information. And of course, this has led to parapsychologists supposing the metaphysical explanation involving consciousness. So the challenge is to find is to transfer information across time from the brain in the future to the brain in the present. So now with this, your question is, how do you transfer the information back in time?
Exactly, especially when there are so many variables that can affect the future at any moment.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
All right, let's say the future, according to what I understand, you're saying has already happened, and we are just getting that information back and understanding it in the present. Am I correct?
You could say that, yes. It's the theory I'm going to suggest is based on the block universe idea,
Okay.
which is based on the special theory of relativity, and David Bohm's interpretation of quantum mechanics. And both of these, of course, regard the universe as fixed, so that future events do exist. The problem is that the conventional interpretation of quantum mechanics, the so-called Copenhagen interpretation, regards the future universe as not yet determined. According to this theory, you cannot know the nature of the outcome of a quantum process until after the process has been produced.
Right.
So turning to David Bohm's interpretation and his concept of the implicate order, he says that future events do exist. That he was unhappy with the orthodox version, the idea of an indeterminate state for matter and the need for an observer, and he suggested that there was a hidden order behind this apparent indeterminate state. In other words, particles are always particles, and not only when they're being observed. He suggested the idea that the particle is accompanied by a quantum potential, a non-local field consisting of what he calls pilot waves. The pilot wave contains information about the surroundings, and it guides the particle somewhat like a ship on autopilot. So
right.
These ideas led to his idea of the implicate order, which is a spaceless, timeless order based on the zero-point energy field. Everything is connected in the implicate order, including matter and consciousness.
All right, John, we've got to take our first break. Please stand by.
Yes.
Exonation, Jon Taylor is our special guest, and that's JonTaylor. So that's JonTaylor.com is his website. And John and I will be back. I'm sorry, JonTaylor.org. You're right. I'm sorry. John and I will be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and in Ontario on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM, streamed around the world on classic1220.ca.
Love them and leave them, give them the air, hurt and deceive them, say you don't care, break their hearts and let them fall like rain on your back stairs, then call me up tomorrow, you know I'll still be there when the moon disappears forever and the sun shines electric blue and the mountains are
Exonation, Jon Taylor is our special guest, jontaylor.org, and that's JONTAYLOR.org. And Jon is the author of Contact with the Future, The Astonishing Power of Intuition and Precognition. Jon, let me just give you a hypothetical situation here. Is it fair to say that you and I have different futures?
Well, I think to answer that, I would say that we make decisions in the present. You make your decisions, I make mine.
Right.
And the result of these decisions becomes our destiny.
Oh.
Whereas the things we don't change are already part of our destiny.
All right, so when we take the number of...
answer?
Well, I'm not finished yet. I was just kind of trying to get a baseline here. With all the people that are presently in the world, I have a hard time understanding how everybody else's future affects our future to such a point that we can actually go into the future, find out what is going on in our world, come back and realize what's going on. And if we can do it, everybody else in the world can do it as well. And I just don't understand how that can happen. Because, like I'm driving along the road, I decide to turn right instead of left. It's the pebble effect.
Yes, it's very subtle points, these, and it's rather difficult to express them. What I'm suggesting in my theory, well, I'm adopting what is known as a representational theory, which is accepted by the majority of neuroscientists. And this theory says that we perceive the world not as it is, but as the brain computes it more likely to be. In other words, perceptual information and memories are both represented in the same pattern of neuronal activation, and this is unique to every person. So what I'm saying is that when we experience an event, we activate a pattern continuously, and it gives rise to conscious experience. But when we retrieve a memory, we activate the same pattern, but to a lesser degree. But the degree of activation has to reach a threshold in order for conscious experience to be produced. So in a precognition, this becomes unique to the person who has the precognition, because this person activates a pattern containing information about himself or herself. And this is unique. It's like a fingerprint. It's unique to that person. So when the neuronal pattern that he or she activates in the present is similar to a pattern that they'll activate later in the future, this sets up a unique connection between this person in the present and this person in the future. But I wouldn't say he actually goes into the future. What happens that in the future, he experiences an event and he activates a unique pattern, which is unique to him. So in the present, when he happens to activate a similar pattern, you get a resonance between the two patterns, and the amount of activation of the present pattern may increase to the level at which it produces conscious awareness. The person may find himself thinking about what is later going to be the event. So now, to answer your question more specifically, in the case of telepathy, I suggest that telepathic contacts with other people are very, very difficult to achieve. Let me give an example.
Sure, please.
Supposing Carol is in Toronto and she is thinking about some emotional event. I'll explain later why the emotion is important. She's thinking about an emotional event, and she activates in her brain a neuronal pattern in which she associates the event with her own previous experiences of that event. So now Tom, for example, in London, happens to think about a similar event. So this might seem like conditions for telepathy. But the problem is that when Tom activates his neuronal pattern corresponding to this event, he associates the event with his previous experiences. So the overall pattern activated by Carol in Toronto and Tom in London are completely different. You don't get a resonance between the patterns, so you don't get a telepathic contact. And I suggest that most cases which appear to be telepathy are not due to telepathy at all. They're due to the person precognizing his future knowledge of the event. Because if you think you've had a telepathic experience, you don't really know whether or not it's telepathy until the other person, for example, calls you by telephone and tells you about the event. So I suggest that telepathy is quite rare. It might in certain cases occur when you get a lot of people thinking the same thing, and this might amplify the effect. But from one person to another, I suggest it's difficult.
So what's the difference between ESP and telepathy?
Well, ESP is a term which covers the three ostensible phenomena: precognition with yourself in the future,
Right.
Telepathy with another person, and clairvoyance, where the connection is supposed to be with an inanimate event. And this is a phenomenon which I suggest doesn't happen at all. And I suggest it's being a major error in the case of parapsychologists, because the vast majority do think in their experiments that they're making contact with the targets generated for their experiments.
All right. If
Yes.
telepathy doesn't exist, how can ESP then exist? Because in my opinion, from what I understand you saying, they're both the same thing.
No, ESP. If you talk about precognition, telepathy, and clairvoyance, it's probably better to forget about ESP. It's simply a blanket term which is misleading for the simple reason that according to my theory, of course,
Right.
I may be wrong, but if I'm right, clairvoyance doesn't exist. All ESP then is a link between living brains through space and time. Precognition is a link with your own brain in the future, and telepathy is a link with someone else's brain.
But I'm having a problem understanding how our brain can link with a future that hasn't happened yet.
Well, this goes back to Bohm's theory. Let me just explain briefly, if I can. It's
Sure.
a rather difficult concept to understand. But this idea of the implicate order, which according to Bohm unfolds to give successive instances of the universe as we know it, the explicate order. And then these instances are immediately re-enfolded back into the implicate order. So the notion of continuity of existence is given by the rapid recurrence of similar forms. It's a bit like the frames of a film projected on the screen at the movies. The individual frames give you a continuous image with a smooth transition from one frame to the next. So this implicate order is a sort of field containing an infinite number of pilot waves which converge and diverge to produce the particles in the universe as we know it. And Bohm, in fact, he partly got his ideas from Eastern philosophies. For example, Aristotle referred to this field as the plenum, and the Eastern traditions refer to prana or chi. But they're all interpretations of this field, which is outside space and time. That's the key to this. It isn't. You're not transferring the information within space and time. If to do that, you run into all sorts of paradoxes, you run into problems in the physics, but you bypass space and time completely. Because if a structure is unfolded in the future, and a similar structure is unfolded now, these structures resonate within the implicate order, and it makes them unfold at different places at different times, but in such a way that they become more similar. So this change in similarity is a means of transferring information, but the transfer has come from outside space-time. It doesn't involve transmitting a message backwards in time. That would be very difficult to explain. But since the structures resonate outside of space-time, then they can transfer information. Perhaps if I apply the process to processes in the brain, in which neuronal networks are connected to what's known as a spatio-temporal pattern of activation. It's a kind of activation which has duration in time and occupies extension in space. So when similar patterns resonate in the implicate order, they unfold in such a way that they're more similar to each other. And this is what allows a transfer of information.
John, stand by. I've got to take another break here. Exo Nation. Jon Taylor is our guest this hour. JONTAYLOR.org is his website. And John is the author of Contact with the Future, The Astonishing Power of Intuition and Precognition. And John and I will be back on the other side of this short break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and of course we're streaming around the world on classic1220.ca. Don't go away. We'll be back with this very interesting topic.
Love 'em and leave 'em, give them the end, hurt and deceive them, say you don't care, break their hearts and let them fall like rain on your back step, then call me up tomorrow.
Constant sorrow through his day. I am the man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my day. I bid farewell to old Kentucky, the place where I was born and bred, the place where he was born and bred.
And welcome back, everyone. Tonight is Halloween night, and I'm sure that by now all the children that have been knocking on doors, yelling trick or treat, wearing all those scary costumes are all back in their homes, sorting through their cash. And, wow, I remember those days. I remember our kids coming home with pillowcases filled with candy. Laura and I going through the candy to see what they could eat and what they couldn't eat. And then the next couple of days, with all the candy they were eating, oh my Lord, we had to use a spatula to get them off the ceiling with all that energy and all that sugar in their systems. And then a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two later, we had to take them to the dentist because of all the candy they ate. And it is this fact, my friends around the world, that lead me to believe that Halloween is still maintained by the Canadian and American Dental Association as a way to make money. Anyway, happy Halloween, everyone. Jon Taylor's our guest. And Jon, is it possible then, based on the way that I understand you're looking at the present and the future, that we're in kind of a matrix and that reality really isn't real?
I don't. This is the most difficult part of understanding the idea of the block universe. I pondered about this for a long time, and my conclusion is that it depends on your point of view, the point from which you look at it. If you look at the spatio-temporal continuum, the block universe,
Right.
from outside, you see everything is static. Everything is within this block. All the events that ever have happened, that are happening now, and that happen in the future, are contained within this block, and there's nothing you can do to change it. But if you and what I should say is that, according to Einstein, the present moment is sort of fictional. It's really, it's as if one's consciousness is acting as a scanner and scanning the contents of this block. So we experience events in the present, and we leave behind the events that happened in the past, and we have yet to come across the events in the future. But if instead of looking from outside the block, you look at from inside the block, from your own point of view, you do in fact make decisions, and these decisions will affect the contents of the block. But the idea is, if I give an example in which in precognition one supposedly affects the past, well, how can you do that in a block universe where the past is fixed? Well, the answer to this is that when you look back into the past, you don't change the past. This is a very subtle point. You don't change it to make it different from what it was. You contribute to it becoming what it is. So you respect the block, but you have affected, you've contributed in making the block rather than change the block from what it was into something else. Am I clear on this? I know it's a very, very subtle. It took me a long time to understand it, and it's a very difficult point to put over.
I certainly can appreciate that. But at the end of the day, how is this going to better mankind, and how can we use it to our benefit?
I don't think precognition really is very useful. It's useful academically. It's interesting to know that a certain thing may happen tomorrow, or even that you might be doing a certain thing tomorrow. But one must always remember that if a precognition occurs, the precognition occurs because the future event occurs. So you're capturing a little bit of your future destiny, and you can't alter that destiny. For example, if I'm destined to have an accident in my car tomorrow, because all the various things happening are leading towards the moment of that accident. Now, if I was able to precognize the accident now, I could change the accident. I could prevent the accident because I could decide to stay in bed and not take my car out. So this is what's known, I think you call it in Canada the bilking paradox. In Europe we call it the intervention paradox. And to me, a paradox is a kind of non-logical occurrence. Something must be wrong if a situation comes up against the paradox. Now, what I suggest, I spent a long time working on this. In fact, I had a notice on my desk in front of me telling me to think back from the future. And it took me months to try and get behind this. It was very, very difficult. And luckily, I'd been making a film about a Spanish festival, and I had the job of editing the film at home. And I had a kind of projector known as a picture synchronizer, and I was running bits of film forwards and backwards through a projector to put the various pieces together to make the continuous film. And I found this exercise helped me to adapt to the idea of thinking backwards in time. And the conclusion I came to after many months working on this is that in precognition, you're not making contact with an object in the future. For example, if I wanted to precognize, supposing I was taking a train to Toronto,
Okay.
and I wanted to use precognition to precognize my arrival in Toronto. Now, if I precognized my arrival in Toronto, again, like the idea of the car accident, I could decide to stay at home and not take the train. So what I'm suggesting happens is that you don't precognize the arrival in Toronto, you precognize the complete sequence of cause and effect. You precognize not an object, but an activity, one thing causing another. So in this case, what you precognize is that you take the train to Toronto, the whole thing. So if you do take the train and you successfully arrive in Toronto, you get a precognition. If for some reason you don't arrive in Toronto because there's a train crash, then you don't get a precognition. The problem is that in the brain, you taking the train for granted. So you don't think I'm taking a train to Toronto, but the patterns of activation in the brain create associations. The idea of taking the train is linked with the idea of arrival in Toronto. And this is what you precognize, the whole sequence. So this way, you get over the problem of the intervention paradox.
To me, it seems like a lot of work that really doesn't accomplish anything.
Yes, this is what I'm leading to. In precognition, it's telling you, it's giving you a little bit of your future history. It's not allowing you to change anything. But the second part of my work has been regarding intuition. And this is rather subtle. Psychologists will say that that intuition is attributed to information we already possess, which lies below the threshold for awareness. It leads to an immediate understanding without requiring logical analysis. But this doesn't say how, nor does it acknowledge that intuitions often seem to include information from the future. So what I suggest is that information does come from the future, but in a rather subtle way. First, I use precognition to try and obtain the knowledge that I shall fulfill an intention to do something. But if I'm unable to fulfill the intention, for example, because an accident is going to prevent me, there will be an absence of precognition, which I instantly perceive as what I call an intuitive warning. It's a sort of feeling that something is wrong. And this explains why intuitions tend to be rather vague. You become aware of a danger, but without knowing exactly what the danger is. So this mechanism avoids the paradoxes which would occur if you obtain direct knowledge about the future accidents and then were to use the knowledge to prevent the accident. And interestingly, an American mathematician, William Cox, in 1955, I think it was, he carried out a survey of 28 trains during the years 1950 to 1955, and he compared the number of people at the time on trains at the time of accidents with the number of people on control days, for example, 7 days or 28 days before the day of the accident. And he found that less people had booked tickets on the trains that were destined to crash. So it does suggest that people can detect the things that occur in the future and use the knowledge to change the future to their own advantage. It's a rather subtle idea, but there are many instances of this. Another example is that in the case of the 9/11 disaster, the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center, somebody tried to do a survey because the airlines are reluctant to give a lot of information on passenger statistics. But it appears that the planes which were involved in the disaster, which crashed into the World Trade Center, had something like a third less passengers than on other days, which rather suggests that people either cancelled their tickets or found themselves having something else to do, or perhaps just feeling uneasy
But when we
about
also
the idea of taking the plane.
But wouldn't we also have to have the data on the other days of the month preceding that event in order to actually have a baseline to?
Well, I suppose what Cox was doing
John, we've got to take our final break, so please stand by. Exonation Jon Taylor is our guest, and he's the author of Contact with the Future, The Astonishing Power of Intuition and Precognition. His website is jontaylor.org. And we'll be back as we wrap up this first hour here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. And hour number 2 will commence as soon as we say so long on the other side of this break. Don't go away, we'll be right back. And don't eat too many candies, kids. It's not good for you.
I've seen trouble all my day.
Why does the sun go on shining? Why does the sea rush to shore? Don't they know it's the end of the world? 'Cause you don't love me anymore. Why do the birds go on singing? Why do the stars glow above? Don't they know it's the end of the world? It ended when I lost your love.
Jon Taylor is my very special guest this hour, Exonation. jontaylor.org is his website. And his book is entitled Contact with the Future, The Astonishing Power of Intuition and Precognition. All right, John, we were talking about the data as it applied to the 9/11 date with the airlines that flew into the Twin Towers. There was a significant decrease in the number of people who were supposed to be on those airplanes. That in itself, looking at these facts, is very interesting. But in order to give it any validation, should we not know the history before the event and how many people on such a date would have canceled on that flight?
Exactly, yes, that's the problem. It's a very spectacular case, but it can't really be quoted because we don't have accurate information on the previous history. This is why I quoted the case of Cox's survey of passenger statistics, because he chose for his survey a kind of control sample 7 days before the disaster and 28 days. These being, some people travel on a certain date every month,
Yes.
so they would be included in the survey. And perhaps every week or weeks in succession. So by comparing the week before with the day of the accidents, he had a control, a base reasonably accurate. Well, he deduced, he was a statistician, and he deduced that the odds against chance were about 100 to 1. So fairly high odds, not high statistically as some experiments in precognition, but enough to support his conclusions.
Jon, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you've done a lot of research and hard work into this field and into your theories, as well as learning a great deal about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and so on. At the end of the day, like I asked before, how will all this information help mankind, and how will the common day folk utilize this information? What importance is it to them?
Well, I think there are perhaps two answers to that.
Okay.
The first answer is that if Bohm's theory is proved to be correct, and when Bohm proposed his theory in 1952, it was considered a kind of assault on scientific orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And his director of studies was Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atom bomb.
Right.
And when Bohm's work was published, Oppenheimer was outraged by this, and he said, if we what would it say? I forgot the exact words of this, but something to the effect that if we cannot disprove Bohm, then we must all agree to ignore him. And ignored he was for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And now, in the last few years, last 3 or 4 years, the University of Toronto has a group, Ephraim Steinberg and his associates, have been doing work to detect the quantum potential. And so far, the results are positive. Now, I mentioned that because this is giving new life to Bohm's theory, which has been pretty well forgotten for a long time. But if Bohm turns out to be correct, and his concept of the implicate order, in which we're all united as one, it makes people think that we're all part of the same whole. And if we can do things to contribute good things, we produce a sort of collective unconscious in which we're influencing other people to do good things as well. Because this is now the parapsychology part. I'm saying that if you activate a certain neuronal structure corresponding to influencing other people, for example, in a positive way, and other people happen to think about the same idea, this idea will be reinforced, and it will tend to make them think positively as well. So it can lead to a general positivity in the world.
But what happens if he's wrong?
Well, there'll be the rights and the wrongs, but one hopes that positive activities are on the whole more successful, and these should lead to other people thinking positively as well. The various religions of the world are really teaching this. They're saying people to pray, which to be praying is a way to induce a kind of combined telepathic action. And if enough people pray for a politician, for example, to act in a certain way, then that politician will be influenced, perhaps to a very, very minor extent, but that might be just enough to tip the balance and make him think in another way. Let me give you an example. An example I mentioned in my book is that in which there are two candidates for a job, and the two candidates have interviews, and they're exactly the same. One of them is perhaps a bit better on experience, or a bit worse on his curriculum. But in total, the two candidates are identical. And the interviewer has to decide which of the two candidates she's going to select for the job. Now, if one candidate is optimistic and positive, he's thinking continuously that he can do a good job for the company.
Right.
And he repeats these ideas unconsciously, but he's optimistic and is repeating this. He genuinely thinks, I can do a good job for this company. So the interviewer, trying to decide between the two, thinks for a moment about the possibility that this candidate may do a better job for the company. At that instant, there's a resonance between the candidate and the interviewer, and it influences her thinking. She just tips the balance in his favor,
but
she finds herself thinking, feeling that he'll do the better job. She
but
doesn't know why.
Isn't that just common sense? Isn't that just part of a good interviewer doing their job?
No, well, I've tried to clarify before this. The two are identical. There's nothing. She's used all the analytical arguments in favor of one and the other, and the two are exactly the same. So what it means is that if a very slight influence is produced, we're talking about very slight influence.
Okay, I understand that, but you're saying they are both identical. Therefore, there's no leniency or there's no deprivation on either side.
They're identical in qualifications, in ability.
Okay.
But one of them is thinking, I can do a better job, and he's activating the structure in his brain corresponding to the idea that I can do a better job. So when the interviewer activates the same pattern in her brain,
right,
you get a resonance between the two patterns and a very slight influence. So if we're really talking about a borderline case, I insist on that, it's got to be a borderline case, but this very slight influence might just tip the balance in favor of the candidate who's positive. Obviously, such a candidate is going to convey positivity through his way of behaving. But what I'm trying to say is that we include that in the valoration of the two. All those factors are taken into consideration. At the end of the day, there's nothing to distinguish one from the other. But the positive one can have produce this influence, and the interviewer, she just feels, she can't say why, she just has a feeling that this candidate will do a better job. And the same, well, the occultists use, the shamans use this technique to bring back the lost lovers, to influence people to a greater extent, but using very elaborate techniques, ceremonies, repeating the idea that they can produce a certain effect, and then producing this effect on the victim. Well, victim in the case of someone trying to do harm to someone, or to produce a positive effect in other cases.
John, the time has come very shortly when we must say so long. Where can people get a copy of your book, Contact with the Future, The Astonishing Power of Intuition and Precognition?
Yes, it's available in Amazon, in all the world markets.
Excellent.
Canada, United States, everywhere.
John, take care of yourself. Thank you so much for joining us. And Exo Nation, once again, our guest this hour has been Jon Taylor. That's JONTAYLOR.org. I'll be back on the other side of this very short break as the Exxon continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Now, if you'd like to send me an email, my email address is exxon@exxonradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Exxon Radio TV. And we're heard Monday through Friday right here on the Exxon Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ, right here in St. Catharines. In fact, just about a 5-minute walk from here. I don't know, Exonation. I asked a few questions, didn't get the answers to them. There was a lot of skating here. And it reminded me of one of the Stanley Cup games that I watched when I was a kid, because there was certainly a lot of skating that was going on here. But I'm still trying to figure out what the heck we need all that information for, especially if it's all based on whether or not one person is right over the other person, and the person who wants to be right has been shunned for 20 some odd years by the other side. It's too complicated for me. It really is. Exonation, I'll be back on the other side as we continue with hour number 2 here in the X Zone. So whatever you do, don't go away. And don't forget, not too many of the Halloween candies, kids. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back.